The current date is November 1st, 2025, but this story takes me back a few months to a drizzly afternoon in Seattle, where the rain tapped against the bus windows like impatient fingers. The interior lights cast a warm, yellowish glow, contrasting with the slick, gray streets outside, where traffic crawled like a reluctant river. My name is Margaret Thompson, Maggie to most folks, and at 58, this school bus has become my second life. I used to be a mechanic, fixing cars for over 30 years in a bustling garage downtown. Retirement didn't suit me. I got restless, so I applied to drive for the local school district, shuttling kids to and from class. The route's short, from the winding neighborhoods of West Seattle to the middle school, barely 20 minutes each way. But after 3 years, I know every pothole, every stop sign, and even which kid has the loudest laugh echoing through the aisles. Lately, though, my rearview mirror kept catching the same lonely figure. Sophia Langford, a new transfer student in 8th grade, was small for her age, with thin shoulders and long dark hair that often fell like a curtain over her pale face. She always claimed the third-row seat by the window, clutching an old, faded backpack with both hands as if it were her lifeline. She didn't chat with the other kids. While they giggled over TikTok videos or traded snacks, she'd stare out at the rain-streaked glass, her expression blank. What struck me most was how, as the bus emptied after school, her shoulders would start to shake. Silent tears would slip down her cheeks, not the dramatic sobs of a scraped knee, but the quiet kind that spoke of a deeper wound, one buried so far inside it hurt just to watch. That day, as I navigated a sharp curve, my peripheral vision caught her dipping a hand under the seat, her movements furtive, like she was hiding something precious. A soft thud followed, barely audible over the engine's hum. I called back gently, "Everything okay back there?" She jerked her head up, her eyes red-rimmed and wide with surprise. "Sorry, I just dropped my handkerchief," she mumbled, her voice small and hurried. I nodded, but doubt nagged at me. This wasn't normal. For 3 days straight, the crying, the hiding, something was off. What secret was this girl carrying that made her world so heavy? As the last kids hopped off, leaving just us, I tried to sound casual. "Rough day, huh? When I was your age, I got picked on a lot too. But you gotta push through, right?" She didn't respond, just grabbed her pink backpack, worn at the edges, and shuffled off the bus. In that moment, I glimpsed a red mark on her wrist, like a bruise from something tight wrapped around it. My heart skipped. Her posture was hunched, her steps heavy as she headed toward an old Victorian house at the lane's end, its paint peeling, windows cluttered with dusty curtains, like a forgotten relic cut off from the world. That night, sleep evaded me. I tossed in my bed, replaying her swollen eyes, that slender wrist, the backpack's mysterious contents. The rain pattered against my apartment window, a rhythmic reminder of the day's gloom. By morning, as I fired up the bus engine, routine as ever, Sophia boarded looking even more drained. Her face was gaunt, her blue eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She pressed her backpack's bottom flat against her lap, as if guarding a fragile treasure. The other kids chattered about the latest Marvel movie and celebrity gossip, oblivious. Then, a familiar face climbed aboard. Evelyn Ramirez, or Evie, a 72-year-old neighbor who ran a small herbal shop nearby. She often rode to the farmer's market, her silver-streaked hair tied back, her warm brown eyes always kind. Evie glanced at Sophia and whispered to me, "Maggie, that girl's eyes, they remind me of my own back in the day, hiding so much pain." My stomach nodded. I wanted to press her, but she shook her head. "Let her speak when she's ready." That afternoon, after drop-offs, I lingered, pretending to check the bus. Bending down, I pried open the seat compartment where she'd been fiddling. There it was, a small, wrapped bundle. My hands trembled as I unwrapped it. A cracked wooden bracelet, a yellowed black and white photo of a young woman cradling a baby, her features soft but blurred, and a faded letter. The envelope read, To the man I hated and loved my whole life. A chill ran through me. This wasn't just sadness. It was a generational storm. But Sophia was too young to carry it alone. I replaced everything carefully, wiped sweat from my brow, and whispered to the empty bus, "Lord, what has this child been through?" I knew then. I was in too deep to walk away. The night deepened, streetlights casting long shadows through my window. I lay awake, the letter's words echoing in my mind. That photo, the woman's gentle smile hid sorrow. The bracelet's beads were worn, each crack a story untold. Who writes of lifelong hate and love? It's not drama. It's the kind that crushes souls. I didn't read the letter fully, just skimmed. But the handwriting wavered. Ink smudged like tears had fallen mid-sentence. I have no right to see you. No plea for forgiveness. But this child has nowhere else. She's our blood. Don't let her wander alone like I did. Signed simply Clara. Clara. The name tugged at a memory, but it slipped away. Next morning before dawn, I paced my kitchen, debating. Confront her? Pretend ignorance? My conscience won. I couldn't ignore this. That afternoon, Sophia boarded as usual, her pale skin almost translucent under the bus lights, her hair messy as if she'd forgotten to brush it. Evie appeared again, basket in hand, sitting beside her. "Tough days lately, sweetie?" Evie asked, softly. Sophia clutched her backpack, silent, biting her lip. Evie persisted gently. "I used to bottle up my hurts, too. But secrets rot inside if you don't let them out." Her words hit me, too. Maybe that's why I drove this bus, to outrun my own past regrets. Evening fell, and I sat in my cozy living room, the bundle from the bus on my coffee table. My hands shook as I debated opening it fully. Finally, curiosity and concern won. The bracelet's wooden beads were etched with age, each one telling of endurance. The photo showed the woman, Clara, I assumed, with high cheekbones and kind eyes, holding the infant close. The letter. I read word for word now. Clara's story poured out. She'd been a waitress in a Seattle diner back in the 90s, falling for a charming man who promised the world. Abandoned when pregnant, she raised the child alone, scraping by on tips and odd jobs. Now battling terminal illness, her last wish was for the father to step up. Our daughter deserves better than my lonely end. The man's name hit like thunder. Richard Harlan. Richard Harlan, the local tycoon, owner of pawn shops, real estate mogul, and chairman of the community church board. In his 70s now, with a polished reputation for charity, donations to schools, food drives, he was the picture of redemption. But whispers from my mechanic days painted him differently. A playboy in youth, leaving broken hearts. This letter shattered that facade. Sophia was his daughter, Clara his discarded love. My head spun. I slumped on the couch, speechless. Then my phone rang. Evie. "Maggie, you found something, didn't you?" Her voice was steady, laced with history. I knew Clara back in the neighborhood. "That girl looks just like her." I choked out. "How much do you know?" Evie sighed. "We were neighbors. Clara got tricked, raised Sophia alone after her family shunned her. Before she passed, she mentioned the letter, for the father if things got dire." My chest tightened. This wasn't just family drama. It was a web of betrayal spanning decades. Old money men dodging responsibility, women sacrificing in silence, kids left adrift. Evie's voice cut through. "You've been through heartaches too, Maggie. What now?" I gripped the letter, tears welling. I couldn't stand by. Sophia needed allies in this cruel world. Night deepened, wind rustling leaves outside. I sat under my old lamp's glow, the letter's weight pressing. Richard's name evoked his image. Tall, silver-haired, sharp-suited, always at galas with a benevolent smile. But Clara's words revealed the monster beneath. "I hate myself for believing your lies," she wrote, script trembling. Until my last breath, my only regret is you. I read it thrice, each time aching more. Dawn broke. I brewed coffee. Resolved. I couldn't meddle alone, but ignoring it felt worse. The next afternoon arrived with a light drizzle, the kind that made Seattle's streets glisten under the overcast sky. Sophia boarded the bus slowly, her slender frame swallowed by an oversized baggy hoodie that hung loosely on her narrow shoulders, her green eyes cast downward, avoiding any contact with the other chattering kids. She looked even more fragile today, her dark hair matted from the rain, and she slumped into her usual window seat, hugging her faded backpack like a shield against the world. Evie climbed aboard shortly after, her wrinkled hands, spotted with age and years of tending her herbal garden, clutching a woven bag filled with fresh greens and remedies. She caught my eye in the rearview mirror and whispered, her voice low and steady, "Maggie, what are we going to do about this now? The poor girl's carrying too much on her own." I nodded subtly toward Sophia, signaling it was time to reach out. Evie understood immediately and made her way down the aisle, easing into the seat beside the girl with a gentle smile. "Hello again, dear," Evie began softly, her warm tone like a comforting blanket. "I've noticed you've been looking a bit down these past few days. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but sometimes sharing what's weighing on your heart can make it feel a little lighter. You know, pain shared is pain halved. That's what my grandmother always told me when I was young and hurting." Sophia tensed at first, her body stiffening as if ready to bolt, but Evie's kind words seemed to pierce through her defenses. She glanced up briefly, her lips quivering, and then the dam broke. Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled down her pale cheeks in silent streams. She wiped them away hastily with her sleeve, but more followed, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. That evening, I couldn't shake the image, so I invited them both over to my cozy apartment. I prepared a hearty chicken soup using Evie's tried-and-true recipe, the aroma of simmering herbs and vegetables filling the air with warmth. We gathered around my small wooden dining table in the softly lit room, the lamplight casting a golden glow on our faces as rain pattered gently against the window. Midway through the meal, as we savored the rich broth, Evie set down her spoon and looked at Sophia with empathetic eyes. "Life's a lot like this soup, you know," she said thoughtfully. "It needs to simmer for a long time to bring out the flavors. Sometimes it's spicy and hard to swallow at first, those tough moments that burn a bit. But if you endure and let it cook through, it turns sweet and nourishing in the end." Sophia nodded slowly, her teary eyes reflecting the light, a small but genuine smile tugging at her lips for the first time. "I'm really scared," she admitted in a soft, trembling voice. "Everything feels so overwhelming, like I don't know where to turn, but I'll try. I'll try to be stronger." We talked a little more over the soup, sharing bits of our own stories to make her feel less alone, and by the end of the evening, we all agreed. Tomorrow, we'd confront Richard together. It was a big step, but it felt right. Sleep came surprisingly easy that night, my mind at peace for the first time in days. In my dreams, I revisited my younger self, the heartbroken woman who'd faced her own losses and emerged resilient, learning that protecting those we care about starts with showing up. I'd stand by Sophia. No child should navigate such storms alone, and I was determined to be her anchor. The dawn broke with a thick mist hanging over Seattle, the kind that blurred the edges of the world and made everything feel uncertain. I stood in my kitchen, brewing a pot of strong ginger tea, the spicy aroma filling the air as I tried to steady my racing nerves. At 58, I'd faced plenty of tough moments in my life, losing my husband to a sudden heart attack years ago, scraping by as a single mom before becoming a mechanic. But this felt like my biggest gamble yet. I was about to drag a vulnerable girl into a confrontation with a powerful man who might reject her all over again. What if it broke her? But deep down, I knew ignoring the truth would hurt her more in the long run. Evie arrived right on time, knocking softly on my door with a bag of homemade muffins and fresh fruit in hand. Her face, lined with the wisdom of 72 years, was set with quiet determination. Her silver-streaked hair pulled back into a neat bun, and her warm brown eyes steady despite the early hour. "Morning, Maggie," she said, stepping inside and giving me a quick hug. "Brought some snacks for the road. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep our strength up. You sure about this?" I nodded, pouring her a cup of tea. "We have to, Evie. For Sophia's sake." Sophia showed up a few minutes later, looking more put together than I'd ever seen her. Her dark hair was neatly braided, falling down her back like a rope of resolve, and her school uniform was freshly pressed, the crisp lines giving her slender frame a sense of armor. She clutched her faded backpack tightly, as if it held all her courage. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but there was a spark in her green eyes, a mix of fear and quiet determination that made my heart swell with pride. "Thank you both for doing this with me. I couldn't face him alone." We piled into my old pickup truck, the engine rumbling to life with a familiar growl. The drive across town was mostly silent, the only sounds the hum of the tires on the wet pavement and our collective breaths, fogging the windows slightly in the cool morning air. Sophia sat in the passenger seat, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her knees, staring out at the passing neighborhoods, modest homes with overgrown yards giving way to busier streets lined with coffee shops and offices. I glanced at her occasionally, wanting to say something reassuring, but words felt inadequate. Evie, from the back seat, broke the quiet once. "Remember, sweetie, whatever happens today, you've already shown more bravery than most adults I know. We're right here with you." Sophia managed a small nod, her lips pressed into a thin line. As we approached Richard's pawn shop, it loomed ahead like a fortress of secrets. The grand building had a bold red sign reading Harlan's Emporium, flanked by stone statues of eagles that seemed to guard the entrance, and the faint scent of incense wafted from recent church charity events he'd hosted there. Inside, the polished wooden counters gleamed under bright lights, displaying rows of jewelry, antiques, and electronics that spoke of other people's lost treasures. A young clerk behind the counter, with slicked-back hair and a wary expression, eyed us suspiciously as we entered. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped. "We're here to see Mr. Harlan," I replied firmly, keeping my voice even. "It's a private matter, important family business." He hesitated, glancing at our unlikely trio, but eventually nodded and disappeared into the back office to notify his boss. Moments later, Richard Harlan himself emerged from a staircase, descending with the confident stride of a man used to command. He was tall and broad-shouldered, in his early 70s, with slicked-back white hair that gave him a distinguished air and piercing blue eyes that scanned us sharply. Dressed in a tailored suit, he exuded the polished image of the local tycoon everyone admired for his philanthropy. "What is this about?" he barked, his voice gruff and impatient, crossing his arms as if to shield himself from whatever we brought. I took a deep breath and pulled the faded letter from my pocket, holding it out with steady hands. "Mr. Harlan, this is something you need to read. It's from Clara." His face paled instantly as he took it, his thick fingers trembling slightly. He unfolded the paper, his eyes darting across the words, and I saw the color drain from his ruddy cheeks. "Clara," he murmured, his voice barely audible, laced with a mix of shock and long-buried pain. Sophia stood beside me, trembling like a leaf in the wind, her small hands clenched at her sides. I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder to steady her, feeling the rapid beat of her heart through her thin frame. Richard looked up from the letter, his eyes locking onto Sophia's face. You're her daughter?" His voice cracked, the gruffness giving way to raw vulnerability. Sophia nodded slowly, her chin lifting just a fraction. "Yes," she whispered, her tone steadier than I expected. A heavy silence fell over the shop. The only sound, the distant tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. Richard's piercing eyes flickered with an internal struggle, regret, denial, perhaps even a flicker of long-suppressed affection. How did you get this letter?" he asked, his words stumbling out, the letter crumpling slightly in his grip. Sophia's voice gained strength as she replied, "My mom left it for me before she died. She wanted me to give it to you myself, so you'd know the truth." Richard's composure shattered. He leaned against the counter for support, tears welling in his blue eyes and spilling down his weathered cheeks. He looked like a man whose carefully built world was crumbling. Evie, ever the no-nonsense one, couldn't hold back. She stepped forward, her voice sharp but measured. "Crying now, are we? Where were you all those years ago when Clara needed you? When this girl was growing up without a father?" Richard bowed his head, his broad shoulders slumping in defeat. "You're right," he admitted hoarsely, his voice thick with emotion. "I was a fool, a coward. I ran from my responsibilities, too scared to face what I'd done. I've built this life, this reputation, but it's all hollow without making things right." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she pressed on, her voice breaking slightly. "Did you ever think about us? About Mom and me? All alone?" He looked at her directly, his face etched with genuine remorse. Slowly he lowered himself to one knee, his suit creasing as he bowed his head. "Child, I've wronged you more than words can say. Every night, regrets haunted me, but I was too ashamed to act. Please, let me make amends now. Whatever it takes." Sophia let out a sob, hugging her backpack tighter as if it could absorb her pain, tears streaming freely. We stood there in that charged moment, the air thick with unresolved emotions. As we finally turned to leave, the sun broke through the clouds outside, casting a warm light through the shop's windows. Evie squeezed my arm and whispered, "We did the right thing, Maggie." As we stepped out of Richard's pawn shop into the bright Seattle sunshine, its warmth enveloped us like a tentative embrace, but I knew this fragile peace wouldn't last without more words spoken. Before we could even reach the sidewalk, hurried footsteps echoed behind us. It was one of Richard's aides, a young man in a crisp suit, calling out breathlessly, "Please wait. Mr. Harlan would like a moment." We turned, and there was Richard himself, emerging from the doorway, his usually impeccable silver hair slightly disheveled, his broad shoulders heaving as he caught his breath. His piercing blue eyes, now softened with vulnerability, locked onto Sophia. I can't just let you walk away like this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Please, let me take you all to lunch. We need to talk, really talk. Give me a chance to explain, or at least to listen." Sophia hesitated, her slender fingers twisting the strap of her backpack, her green eyes flickering with a mix of doubt and curiosity. She glanced at me and Evie for reassurance. I nodded encouragingly, and Evie murmured, "It's up to you, dear, but sometimes a meal opens doors." Finally, Sophia sighed and agreed softly. "Okay, but just lunch." Richard's face lit up with a grateful smile, though it was tinged with nervousness, and he led us to a nearby cozy diner a block away, a classic spot with worn wooden booths, checkered tablecloths, and the comforting aroma of sizzling burgers and fresh coffee wafting from the kitchen. It was the kind of place where locals gathered for unhurried conversations, far from the grandeur of his business empire. We settled into a corner booth, the vinyl seats creaking under us. Richard, who I'd always seen as commanding and unshakable in his tailored suits, fumbled awkwardly with the laminated menus, his lined face flushing slightly. I'm not good at this," he admitted with a sheepish chuckle, setting the menu down. "Inviting my daughter to eat, it's something I never thought I'd get the chance to do. Order whatever you like. It's on me." Sophia's expression softened just a fraction, her pale cheeks gaining a hint of color as she scanned the options. As our meals arrived, steaming plates of burgers, fries, and salads, we eased into the conversation. Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the table, and began to confess in a low, steady voice. I was young and selfish back then, full of ambition but no spine. When Clara told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I was scared of what it would mean for my future, my family's expectations. So I left her, convinced myself it was for the best, but I've built my whole life on regrets ever since. Every success felt hollow because I knew what I'd abandoned. His words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Sophia set down her fork, her voice steady but laced with hurt. If you regret it so much, how do you plan to make up for it now? Words are easy, but Mom's gone, and I've been alone. Richard nodded, his eyes glistening. You're right, they are easy. That's why I want to do more. I'll cover your tuition and living expenses, about $50,000 a year, whatever you need to finish school and beyond. And legally, I'll recognize you as my daughter. Make it official so you have the security you deserve. No strings, just a way to start righting the wrongs. Evie hummed skeptically from her side of the booth, her wrinkled hands cradling her coffee mug. Sounds generous, but money doesn't heal everything. What's the catch? Richard shook his head earnestly. No catch. I've got the means now, and it's the least I owe. But Sophia pushed back, her tears welling again as she refused outright. I don't want your money or your name. What I need to know is why. Why were you so cruel back then? Did you ever think about what you were doing to us? Richard's composure cracked. He rubbed his temples, his voice breaking. It was pure cowardice, plain and simple. I was afraid of commitment, of failure. I dreamed of Clara for years after, her gentle smile, the life we could have had. But by then, it was too late. I'd married someone else, built a facade of success. I convinced myself forgetting was easier, but it haunted me. Sophia whispered through her own tears. Mom never hated you, you know. She only hated herself for believing in you. Those words hit Richard like a wave. He buried his face in his hands, sobbing quietly, his broad frame shaking. The diner noise faded around us as the atmosphere shifted from tension to a tentative release. We sat in that raw moment, letting the emotions settle, and by the time we finished eating, promises were made. Small steps toward trust, like weekly check-ins and family counseling. As we left the diner, the sun still shining overhead, I felt a profound shift in the air. A fragile family beginning to form, one honest word at a time. Stories like this don't end neatly, wrapped up with a bow after one emotional lunch. Real life has a way of throwing curveballs, and that evening, as the sun dipped below Seattle's skyline, my phone buzzed incessantly with news alerts that made my stomach drop. The headlines screamed across my screen. Local mogul Richard Harlan acknowledges illegitimate daughter, scandal rocks community. It turned out some nosy patron at the diner had snapped photos of our gathering, capturing Richard's tearful confession and Sophia's vulnerable expression. Those images leaked online faster than wildfire, twisted into sensational stories with titles like Heiress Drama Unfolds, Church Leaders, Hidden Secret Past Exposed, and Inheritance Battle Brews in Seattle Elite Circles. The articles speculated wildly about family fortunes, Richard's estimated $2 million estate, and painted Sophia as a gold digger, ignoring the raw pain we'd all witnessed. Panic set in almost immediately. My phone rang, and it was Sophia, her voice cracking with fear and desperation. Maggie, what am I going to do? Everyone's talking about it, at school, on social media, everywhere. My classmates are sharing the photos, whispering behind my back, and I can't even step outside without feeling like all eyes are on me. I just want to hide forever. Her words broke my heart. I could hear the sobs catching in her throat, the raw terror of a young girl thrust into the spotlight. I didn't hesitate. Hold on, sweetie. I'm coming right over, I assured her. Grabbing my keys, I drove through the twilight rain to her foster home, a modest bungalow on a quiet street lined with maple trees shedding their autumn leaves. When I arrived, she was huddled in the living room corner, her slender frame curled up on the worn carpet, knees drawn to her chest, her green eyes wide and haunted, red from crying. She looked so small and broken, like the weight of the world had finally crushed her spirit. Gently, I knelt beside her and pulled her into a hug. "We'll face this together, Sophia. You're not alone in this storm. Evie and I are right here with you. We'll figure out a way to set the record straight and protect you from all this nonsense." She nodded weakly, wiping her tears, and we decided to loop in Evie for support. The three of us piled into my truck and headed back to Richard's pawn shop, the grand building now feeling like a fortress under siege from prying eyes. When we arrived, Richard was pacing in his office, his silver hair disheveled, his sharp blue eyes bloodshot from stress. He looked up as we entered, his face etched with guilt. "This is all my fault," he admitted right away, his voice heavy with regret. "Last night, after our lunch, I was so overwhelmed that I confided in an old friend over the phone, shared too much in a moment of weakness. I never imagined he'd spread it, but now it's everywhere. I'm so sorry. I've hurt you again without meaning to." Sophia, still shaky but gathering her courage, stepped forward. "Issuing a statement isn't enough, Dad," she said firmly, her voice steadier than I'd expected. "I need you to stand with me openly. No more hiding in the shadows. Let's face the world together, admit the truth publicly, without excuses or half measures. That's the only way we can move past this." Richard's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded vigorously. "You're right, Sophia. I agree completely. I'll stand by your side, no hiding. We'll do a joint press release tomorrow, clear the air, and show everyone we're family now." His commitment felt genuine, a far cry from the coward he'd once been. As we left the shop, the rain had stopped, and a faint rainbow arched over the city. We walked out feeling stronger, united against the chaos. Sophia's words from earlier echoed in my mind. I don't fear poverty or gossip anymore, just living in the shadows. That night, for the first time, hope flickered brighter than the scandal's glare. The days following the media storm blurred into a relentless haze of unwanted attention, turning our quiet lives into something out of a tabloid nightmare. Reporters camped outside Sophia's foster home and even showed up near the school bus route, their cameras flashing like intrusive lightning as they shouted questions about the secret Harlan heir. At school, the whispers were just as cruel, classmates staring, gossiping in hallways about her sudden rich dad, or speculating wildly about hidden fortunes. Sophia, with her slender build and those wide green eyes that now carried a mix of defiance and weariness, confided in me one afternoon on the bus. "It's like everyone's watching me, waiting for me to crack," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the engine's rumble. "I just want to be normal again." But Sophia didn't crack. Instead, she channeled her pain into something positive, deciding to volunteer at Richard's community church events, a place where he often hosted charity drives and senior luncheons. It started small. One Saturday morning, she showed up in a simple volunteer vest that hung a bit loose on her frame, her dark hair tied back neatly. She helped set up tables, poured coffee for the elders, and listened patiently to their stories, her gentle smile drawing them in. I drove her there myself, watching from the sidelines as she moved with quiet purpose. Richard was there too, his tall silver-haired figure usually so imposing in his tailored suits, but now his stern features softened into something like paternal pride. He'd stand in the corner, arms crossed, his blue eyes following her with a mix of awe and regret. "She's got Clara's kindness," he told me once, his voice gruff but emotional, as we shared a quick coffee break. I never deserved this second chance. Evie and I became her steadfast support system during those turbulent weeks. We'd meet for afternoon tea at Evie's cozy herbal shop, surrounded by the earthy scents of dried lavender and chamomile. Over steaming mugs, we'd share our own tales of hardship, Evie's stories of immigrating alone in her youth, my own regrets from a failed marriage that left me wary of trust. "You're stronger than you know, kiddo," Evie would say, her wrinkled hands patting Sophia's arm reassuringly. "This mess? It's just a chapter, not the whole book." Sophia would nod, absorbing our words like a sponge, her tears turning into determined resolve. The real test came one tense evening at Richard's sprawling estate on the outskirts of Seattle, a grand house with manicured lawns and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Puget Sound. He'd called a family meeting to address the fallout, but his other children, two grown sons in their 40s, both sharp-suited businessmen with skeptical expressions, objected fiercely. They feared the scandal would dilute the family inheritance, a hefty $2 million estate built from Richard's pawn shops and real estate deals. "This girl's appearance changes everything," one son argued, his voice rising in the opulent living room, gesturing at Sophia, who sat quietly on a leather couch. "We need to protect what's ours, legal tests, trusts, the works. What if she's just after the money?" Sophia stood tall then, her slight frame belying her inner steel. She looked them straight in the eyes, her voice steady despite the flush on her cheeks. "I don't want your fortune," she said firmly. "I've lived without it my whole life, scraping by with Mom. What I want is family. Real connections, not cash. If that's too much to ask, then maybe we don't have one." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging like a fog. Richard stepped in, his face etched with shame and admiration. "She's right. This is on me, not her. We'll sort the legal side. But family comes first. No more divisions." Tensions simmered down after that. Apologies exchanged over awkward coffee. Slowly, bonds began to form, shared dinners, cautious conversations that turned strangers into something resembling kin. Through it all, Sophia's resilience shone, teaching us that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but building on its ruins. As the weeks turned into months, the initial storm of the scandal gradually subsided, much like how Seattle's relentless rain eventually gives way to clearer skies. The headlines faded from the local news feeds, replaced by newer dramas, and the whispers in the community quieted down to occasional murmurs. People have short memories when it comes to other folks' troubles, I suppose. But for Sophia, those turbulent days marked the start of something profound, a slow but steady blooming, like a flower pushing through cracked soil after a long winter. She started showing up on my bus with a newfound spark in her green eyes, no longer hiding behind her hair or slouching in her seat. Instead, she'd sit up straighter, her slender frame carrying a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, as the bus rumbled along our familiar route, she even volunteered to help a couple of younger kids who were squabbling over seats. "Hey, why don't you sit here? There's room for both," she said gently, her voice steady and kind, guiding them with a patience that made my heart swell. The kids listened, and Sophia shot me a small, triumphant smile in the rearview mirror. It was moments like these that showed me she was healing, piece by piece. She'd taken to repairing that old wooden bracelet from her mother's bundle, spending evenings at home with needle and thread, mending the cracks one bead at a time. "It's not perfect," she told me one day after school, holding it up to the light streaming through the bus window. The beads gleamed faintly, their worn surfaces now held together with careful stitches. "But that's okay. The scars make it stronger, right? Kind of like us." I nodded, choking back emotion. "Exactly, kiddo. Those mended parts tell the real story." Our drives became opportunities for deeper talks. One crisp morning, as we passed the old oak tree near the church, its massive trunk twisted but unyielding, roots burrowing deep into the earth, I pointed it out. "See that tree, Sophia? It's been standing there for over a century, through storms and droughts. Roots go deep. That's why it stands so strong." She gazed at it thoughtfully, her fingers tracing the bracelet on her wrist. "Yeah," she replied softly, her voice carrying a maturity beyond her years. "Like me now. I've got roots too, Mom's memories, and now, maybe even with Richard. It doesn't erase the hurt, but it helps me stand taller." At a community church event a few weeks later, A lively fundraiser with booths, games, and the smell of barbecue wafting through the air, Sophia truly shone. She volunteered at the bake sale table, her hair tied back in a neat ponytail, chatting animatedly with attendees. "Try the chocolate chip cookies. They're my grandma's recipe," she'd say with a warm smile, her pale cheeks flushed with excitement. Richard was there too, standing a bit apart in his neat button-down shirt, his silver hair catching the sunlight. He watched her with beaming pride, his sharp blue eyes softening in a way I'd never seen. Later, he pulled me aside. "Maggie, I can't thank you enough," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Seeing her like this, it's like getting a second chance I don't deserve. She's teaching me how to be better." Evie and I observed from a distance, sipping lemonade under the shade of that old oak. "Look at her go," Evie murmured, her wrinkled face lighting up. "That girl's got a fire in her now." My heart was full, overflowing with a mix of joy and quiet reflection. This was redemption in its rawest form, not some fairy tale ending where everything was instantly fixed, but a real, messy process of forgiveness, growth, and new bonds. Sophia wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving, weaving her past into a stronger future. And in helping her, I'd found a bit of healing for my own old wounds too. Life, it seemed, had a way of circling back with unexpected grace.